So hello and welcome. I'm Lisa, and I'm calling from the Institute for Health and Healing. And I'll be leading you in a discussion about mindfulness and the idea of what if mindfulness isn't been working for me. And so in general, the structure of the calls that I lead on Friday is we just take a moment to ground and focus ourselves. Again, we're probably all multitasking, moving around in our day, and this is just a moment to settle us in what we're doing right now. Then I'll provide some information or some ideas about mindfulness, some tips, and then finally we'll practice mindfulness at the end, incorporating some of what we were talking about. So to begin, if you've joined me before, this will be familiar, we'll just take a moment to recognize how it feels to sit in your chair. So if your mind is moving towards your schedule, your computer, your phone, we're going to simply draw your attention fully to sitting in your chair, or if you're standing. Seeing if you can really focus on where you can feel points of contact between your body and the chair itself. Points of contact between your feet and the floor. And now we'll just take this opportunity. I invite you just to take a nice deep breath in and a full exhale out. And we'll go ahead and do one more, inhaling in and a full exhale out. So mindfulness doesn't work for me. That is something that I hear a lot. It's actually, if you have that feeling, and that's why you're calling in today, I want to normalize and say you're not alone. And so I have been teaching mindfulness as a part. I'm an integrative psychotherapist here, just to kind of give a background, and I've been using mindfulness as a part of the therapeutic process for 15 years. In the 15 years, of course, people's familiarity with the term mindfulness has changed. The exposure of it, the number of articles on it, that has certainly shifted from when I began 15 years ago. And from that, we can see that, when we say mindfulness, it might mean many things. I kind of say, in a way, if someone says mindfulness, it's like saying vegetables. It can mean many different types of vegetables. And I think that's important, because one of the first things that happens when we go to do mindfulness is we're carrying expectations and intentions. And so depending on where I learned about mindfulness from, how I got exposed to it, I might be carrying expectations or beliefs with me. And that's important, because when we go to do mindfulness, we're going to decide, is it quote-unquote working for me? Is it effective? And so how we're measuring that has to do with, what do we think the expectation is? So the mindfulness tradition of the East, coming from a spiritual practice and rooted in an Eastern approach, is I'm going to argue, going to have differences from Western approaches and contexts. And that's important, because number one, kind of what's the intention? Is there a spiritual practice? And what does that spiritual practice say or inform? I can say that I learned mindfulness through something called dialectical behavior therapy. The woman that created that, Marsha Linehan, learned mindfulness by going to the East to train. She then took that and said, how do I teach it? Right? And so kind of broke down mindfulness into ways to say, for those of us trying to learn this as a skill in therapy and a skill in life, how would we do it? So although I might have aspects from, of course, the Eastern traditions, it was moved into this context of therapy, and that's going to change things. So I first want to name that, right? And so when I look at what do I believe as a therapist that mindfulness is, that might look different than other people in terms of what I'm expecting and to see and what I would define as successful. But what I have noticed is that when we look at, say, a magazine, a wellness magazine, and if they're going to put a photograph of mindfulness meditation A lot of times it's this image of a really kind of peaceful, and usually it's, a woman, maybe that's just what I'm reading, but on a rock, and she's out in nature somewhere, or maybe, and looking very calm, and her body looks, very calm and organized, and the environment is calm. And so already we might have these ideas about, mindfulness is I'm going to have it happen in a really calm place. I'm going to be really together, and I'm going to be relaxed. I'm going to be relaxed and centered. And so that might be what we're bringing in, that image, when we come in to say, let's practice mindfulness. This is what it means to do it right. And in fact, I want to talk about this idea of doing it right. So if I do mindfulness right, and I want you just to fill in the blanks for yourself, then I should feel blank during it and blank after it. So what are kind of notions that popped in for you just in me saying that? And where that's important is that I kind of want to move into, how I'm going to talk about mindfulness, right? So when I'm looking at it, I'm not looking at it as the outcome of relaxation. I'm looking at it from the perspective of that we suffer with what we don't accept, and we suffer when we stay in places where we have no control. So if my mind and my body are wired to the past and not the present moment, or if they're very concerned about the future, those are both areas where I don't have much control. If I'm concerned about the idea that I'll be better when I have a different feeling, and I'm really focused on change, then I also might suffer if I can't accept how I am in this moment. So in kind of the way I view mindfulness, it's about this idea of being fully in the present moment and accepting our experience. And in the way we're going to do that, we're going to do it non-judgmentally. So kind of moving away from that, I shouldn't feel anxious today, I shouldn't feel sad, I should feel happy, and I should feel relaxed. Moving more into, I am feeling what I'm feeling. And also this kind of concept when we come from therapy, we get surprised if we don't tune into ourselves what behaviors we come to solve the problem, right? So for instance, if I don't recognize that I'm feeling stressed, I might seek to do behaviors that soothe me and do it kind of habitually. Oh, I'm going to reach for the thing that has high carb, high sugar because that is going to soothe me. But I might not recognize, hey, what's driving that behavior is this feeling. And if I have a goal of doing something alternatively different, then it'd be important to know when that arises so I can think of what are other ways that I can take care of me, or how do I just move through this urge without doing any sort of behavior at all. And that's kind of the lens to which I'm looking at it. Also this idea then, if I come into the practice and I'm not feeling grounded and I'm disorganized and I have thoughts all over the place and I go to sit down to do the practice and I find it's hard to sit still and I'm having big feelings, I'm going to label that as still successful because I'm sitting down to feel exactly what I'm feeling and recognize it in that moment. So as opposed to kind of this idea of focusing on what the outcome is, I'm going to get relaxed. And also noticing that when we do a mindfulness practice on that day, it doesn't fit the facts then that we feel uncomfortable. So for many people, including myself, that practice mindfulness on a day where we're really not having the most ideal of days, and we're sitting in the practice, it can be challenging. It's a good practice. We might have, benefits from it, but we just might not say, oh, I feel really refreshed and all my anxiety is gone. And so that's how we can look at then expectations of like, am I saying that I'm not good at mindfulness because I have this notion about how I should be? So when you're going to do mindfulness, some tips that I have is to give it time. So give it time in terms of in the practice itself that day. I always equate with our nervous systems when it's really heightened, when we're really stressed. We can imagine in a metaphor that would be like it's a really hot day. And that mindfulness, which engages our parasympathetic nervous system, could be seen as a cool pool. So for any of you that have gone from a really hot environment to a cold pool, knows what it feels like when you first get in the pool. It is shocking, and it is uncomfortable for most of us. I shouldn't say all, but, it's kind of, I myself have had that experience where you're kind of tiptoeing in and you're not sure, should I plunge in? And so when we're doing mindfulness on a day where we're already kind of on high alert, shifting into that system might take a little bit of time. I use a story here from a young client that I had as such a good teacher to me, and that, I believe he was maybe 14 years old, and I was working with him after he had an incident in school, and he was really upset. And I had asked him, would you like to take a deep breath with me? I'm finding that would be helpful. Would you like to take a deep breath with me? And he took a breath and went, and he said, it didn't work. And I thought that's such a great example of how we are when we're stressed. We try something for a second, and if it doesn't have immediate outcome, we want to move from it. So in the practice, try a bit to give it time. Also to that, do what works. So because I'm coming from a bit of a different mindfulness tradition, I have a belief that we could do mindfulness in many different ways. There's something called dynamic mindfulness, which is the idea that we can kind of put action, breathing, and centering together by taking movement and attention and synchronizing them. So this idea that I'm doing an action, but I'm fully present in it, and I'm really focused, and I might even be able to sync it with my breath. In the Eastern tradition, there's kind of a metaphor that comes up where they talk about just do the dishes. So if you're doing the dishes, try to fully focus on only doing the dishes, and that in itself is a type of mindfulness activity. So knowing our mind's going to be drawn very different places, can I just focus back on the sensation of the dish in my hand, right? On the action of doing the dishes as a way to bring myself into the present moment. So if our thoughts are racing a lot, or our nervous system is really keyed up, we might find that movement is actually more helpful initially. Also, when I used to teach mindfulness or relaxation techniques, sometimes we'd find by doing something like progressive relaxation where we're engaging the muscles and loosening them, engaging them, then regulated enough for people then to be able to do a seated mindfulness. So we're also just going to explore what works and what's effective for me. So if I'm someone that has a hard time sitting still, can I try something first before I move into the practice? And then eventually, if it feels important for me to be able to accept what I'm experiencing enough to be still, then I can try it. But initially, we don't have to engage in a should about what mindfulness is going to look like so much as we want to look, was this effective for me, and staying really focused. So when I teach mindfulness, there's a lot of activities that we could do that says, like, what is something that requires my whole brain to do it? Like, I have to be so focused that I can't really be doing anything else. And those are activities, that we can use to help ground us and anchor us. For myself as an art therapist and in my own life, art making is one of those places where I'm able to really focus on what I'm doing, especially if we don't choose something that's based on how it's going to look. If we just based on the feeling, if I am doing a mindfulness here with clients, sometimes I'll have them just do watercolor, whole page, one color. And that's just the action of the back and forth with the brush and really just trying to stay in the moment. So we move away from the idea that this is art I have to put up and into the idea of this is an experience I'm giving myself. Qigong is also something that I recommend, which is the grandfather of Tai Chi. And in that tradition is the syncing of our movement with breath. And so for folks whose minds are racing a lot, this helps redirect our mind to really focusing on the movements and focusing on syncing our breath in a way that gets us fully present. And we'll do a move based on a Qigong movement at the end of the call so you can get a little of that experience. And so the final tip that I have is focus on acceptance over controlling feelings. So when you're going to approach, going to do mindfulness, I like the lens of saying, I'm here to be able to befriend what I'm feeling right now. I'm here about being able to tolerate what I'm feeling right now or find grounding in what I'm feeling right now, as opposed to I'm here to change me. Pema Chödrön, who writes a lot about meditation, has a quote I really like: meditation practice isn't about trying to throw ourselves away and become something better. It's about befriending who we already are. So kind of coming in with your own, whatever metaphor you have about this is how I'm going to use a meditation practice to try to accept today. And the final thought, actually, I might have said that last one was my final one. This is the final one. But to be compassionate to you about your individual experience. So what we do know is if you have a history of trauma, if you have chronic pain, and these are things many people have, those in itself can be reasons why we might want to have a different style of mindfulness, right? So there's something called, for instance, in yoga, there's something called trauma-informed yoga. And the idea behind looking at pain and trauma is that this idea of tuning inward, if we experience those things, can be triggering and upsetting into itself. Right? So if I'm feeling a lot of distress and pain and I focus heavily on it, right, that might set off my nervous system. So while we're trying to regulate our nervous system, this might be that we have adaptations that we do in order to help our practice. And I want to bring that up because sometimes people kind of sell things as a one-size-fits-all model, and we might say, I don't experience, again, what it is I should experience. Right, and this can be very, hard, especially if we've experienced pain and trauma that have been invalidated. We can feel invalidated by just engaging in this way of self-care. And so we want to be really self-compassionate, really self-validating, treating things as an invitation. And you'll hear me when we do this practice, I'll do invitations to try things. And there's certain skills that we can try to adapt the practice to better fit ourselves. So an example of that is I talked in other calls about this idea of toggling our attention. So if I were having physical pain and I am drawing attention to it and I start to have a sense of distress from it, I can gently move my mind. I can notice it, observe it, and I can gently move my mind somewhere else that's neutral, and then try moving it back, and so on and so forth. And that's just one example, but to be very kind to you, that we all come in with past experiences and histories in our bodies and in our thought process. And so if we're having a hard time, that's valid. And it's more about, okay, well then how do I adapt? So let's go ahead and do a little mindfulness practice today. Before we begin, just kind of a reminder, or for those of you that have maybe never done mindfulness, one way that we can think about what we're doing is we're going to be just allowing our experience to happen non-judgmentally. We might have judgmental thoughts come up, and what we'll be doing is simply noticing those and labeling those. There's a man by the name of Dan Siegel, who I mentioned, has a quote where he says, name it to tame it. So if we're having a feeling or thought and we can simply name that thought, label it, kind of get some distance from it, then it in itself kind of will soften. So we're going to label thoughts as just thoughts, and feelings as just feelings, and an urge as just an urge. And mindfulness is about we don't need to act on those. So for instance, we might have thoughts come up, I don't like this, this is dumb. And we're simply going to say, there you are, there's a judgmental thought. And that's all we're going to do, and bring ourselves back to the practice. So the practice in itself is what's bringing our attention back to the present moment, not all the other times we have done this before or what we're expecting to have happen after. And we're validating our thoughts and feelings and urges simply by noticing them. We're not going to argue them. We're not going to talk ourselves out of them. We're just going to let them be. And in this practice I've done this one on a call before, so this might be another practice in it if you've joined me before, and if this is new, then awesome. But in this practice, we'll be using our senses to ground ourselves. This is a great way for us to try and say, hey, brain, don't be hopping to the future. Don't be kind of ruminating on the past. We need you to be right here and what's happening right here. And we can do that by engaging our body. So we'll begin by doing that, and then we'll move in. We'll finish with a little bit of the movement breath exercise towards the end. So let's go ahead and begin. I invite you now just to find a way to sit comfortably in your chair as best you're able. You might adjust the way you're sitting so that your spine's a little more elongated and your breath is able to travel in and out with ease, or with greater ease. Noticing your shoulders, and if they're up by your ears or they're rolled inward, perhaps it would feel good to roll your shoulders back and drop them a little. And so for right now, we're going to go through the 5 senses. And so for right in this moment, I'd like you to look around to see 5 things that you can observe, and perhaps even 5 things you've never noticed before. A certain crack in the wall, a fuzz on the floor. Let's just take a moment and I invite you to look for 5 visual things. And so next, using the feeling of touch, I invite you to feel and seek out 4 different textures to feel. This could be on your person, so I could feel the material of my pants and then my skin. And when we're doing this, you might even try to tune in a little deeper to see if you can notice, is one warmer than the other? Something cool, something soft? Are there words I would use to simply describe what I'm observing? So 4 things of touch. And now we'll drop deeper into the present moment by using hearing. See if you can hear 3 distinct sounds. This may be external. For instance, can you hear the piano that I'm playing? Can you hear your breathing? So the invitation to listen for 3 distinct sounds. And next, I invite you to see if you can recognize two distinct scents. Sometimes this requires picking something up, like maybe your cup of coffee, the fabric on your shirt, but seeing if you can notice two distinct scents. And here you might notice that there's a judgmental thought that could arise. This is pleasant, this is unpleasant. And we're simply going to just notice that. There is a thought about the scent. And so, lastly, we'll have you just simply observe the taste in your mouth right now, whatever that is. Can you observe a taste? Okay. And so now we'll try to do a little syncing of our breath with movement. And I'll do my best I can to try and describe. I know this is a little bit of a tricky for visual learners like myself that you're not seeing me. But however you interpret what I'm saying is okay, so long as it feels all right to your body. And so here's the invitation, and again, feel free to adjust it to what your body needs are. So for instance, I'm going to talk about raising your arms a certain height. For people with shoulder pain, that might not be accessible to you today, so just gently adjust, and I invite you to do that. So if you could place your palms on your lap, or if you're standing, this could be done standing, by the way, if you have comfort in your office and privacy where this feels okay for you to do, then you could place your hands out in front of you at about your waist where your elbows naturally bend. If you're sitting, you can place your hands, for right now, on your lap. And you're going to place your palms up. And what we'll be doing is syncing our breath so that as we're inhaling, we're going to slowly bring those palms up towards the ceiling, pausing at near the top of our head. And then we pause our breath there as well. And then we'll flip our hands so our palms are down. And when we are exhaling fully, the hands will gently float down with the exhale. And then we'll pause at the bottom, flip our palms up, and inhale, the hands go up. Okay? So again, whatever interpretation you have of what I just said will work, so long as it feels all right to you. It's just a sync with the inhale and exhale. So let's go ahead and begin. Palms facing up, inhaling, and our hands raise up. Pausing, hands flip, exhaling, and hands flip down. Pausing there at the lower, inhaling, hands go up. Pausing at the top, palms flip facing lower, exhaling fully, and the hands float down. So for just a minute, I'll let you go at your own pace, syncing the hands, rising with an inhale, hands floating down with the exhale at whatever speed you'd like to go. So continue to do this, and I'll let you know in a minute when we'll move to the next thing. And if your mind is wandering, simply bring it back to the breath and the movement. And let's take one final round of breath. And now just simply observing, noticing if there's any shifts in your body that happened. Non-judgmentally observing, not as right or wrong, but just what is. Now I invite you just to do a stretch or movement to the body as we get ready to transition back into the other aspects of our day. I thank you so much for joining me, and I wish that over the weekend you have some moments of calm. Take good care.